Hello everyone. Welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night podcast. Story 1. The Tears of the God-Fearing Father. The true story of Martin and his 8-year-old son Caleb. Martin was a respected man, but his blind religious fear and belief in conspiracy theories led him to believe his son was possessed. One night, fanaticism culminated in a brutal act, resulting in Caleb's death under the guise of exorcism. The small town of Dover, Ohio, was a place where everyone knew each other's name and trusted in the community's goodness. Martin was one of the kindest among them, a tall man with a deep, warm voice. He frequently led Bible study sessions, and his home was always filled with laughter, especially the innocent laughter of his 8-year-old son, Caleb. But that public light began to fade. Martin, a man always seeking salvation, started to fall into the rabbit hole of extreme doctrines, crackling audio tapes about the apocalypse and demonic possession. He began to see signs of evil everywhere. In his wife's distracted gaze, in a stray cat crossing the yard, and, most horrifyingly, in Caleb's natural exuberance. "You are disobedient. That is a sign of resistance. The devil is working through you," Martin began to whisper to his son. Fear quickly morphed into obsession. Caleb was no longer allowed to play with other children or watch TV. His life narrowed to endless prayer sessions and his father's interrogations about the voices in your head. His wife, who tried weakly to intervene, was eventually pushed out of Martin's solitary circle. She became a skeptic, an obstacle on the path to salvation. On that fateful night, Caleb spilled a glass of milk. It was a minor accident, but in Martin's sickened mind, it was irrefutable evidence. The sound of the breaking glass was like thunder, triggering the cold rage he had been nurturing for so long. It dragged Caleb into the dark bedroom, the room he had turned into a private sanctuary. In there were no holy statues, only shadows and terror. Martin slammed the door shut, locking his son in with his own madness. In those 15 minutes of horror, not a single scream escaped. Martin did not need screams. He used scripture, using hollow phrases about purification and sacrifice to quell his own fear. He used his own hands and crude tools found in the house, not to beat, but to expel, according to his later testimony. When Martin called the police, his voice wasn't trembling. "I did what had to be done," he told the dispatcher in a calm, chilling tone that sent shivers down the receiver's spine. "I freed my son's soul from the adversary's captivity." When the police arrived, they found Martin kneeling next to Caleb's motionless body, a blood-soaked Bible in his hands, his expression one of frightening serenity, not remorse. Caleb's death was not just a murder case. It was the terrifying collapse of fatherhood, a stark warning about how fanaticism and baseless fear can turn a loving father into a monster, all in the name of faith and salvation. Caleb died not because of the devil, but because of a blind love twisted into cruelty. Story 2. The Fatal Birthday Gift. The true crime story set in a California suburb. Mark and Sarah were a picture-perfect couple on social media, but Mark, a successful businessman, was a pathologically controlling and jealous man. On Sarah's 40th birthday, as she prepared to leave him, he turned a private celebration into a meticulously planned murder, executed with cold and chilling precision. From the outside, the house in Laguna Hills, California, was the epitome of the American dream. Mediterranean architecture, a sparkling pool, and expensive cars in the garage. Mark and Sarah were the neighborhood's golden couple. He was a sharp financial consultant. She was a beautiful and charming interior designer. On Instagram, their life was a continuous feed of romantic getaways and lavish parties. But the camera flash could not illuminate Mark's dark corners. His success came with a twisted sense of entitlement and an absolute need for control. Sarah was not just his wife. She was his greatest asset, a trophy he could never afford to lose. As Sarah began to seek independence, expanding her business, spending more time with friends, Mark's leash of control began to tighten. His jealousy was not about rage, but cold calculation. Sarah had turned 40. She had made up her mind. This sham marriage was over. She had secretly rented an apartment and told her lawyer she would file for divorce right after her birthday to avoid ruining the family celebration. Mark knew. He didn't need her to tell him. He saw it in the bank statements and the secretive phone calls. To him, it was an unforgivable betrayal, an insult to his massive ego. Sarah wasn't just leaving him. She was taking away the reputation and perfection he had painstakingly built. The night of her 40th birthday, Mark organized a small, intimate celebration just for the two of them. He lit candles, uncorked expensive champagne, and even bought a diamond necklace she had always wanted. This preparation wasn't love. It was meticulous staging, a final performance. As Sarah turned her back to admire the necklace in the mirror, Mark acted. There was no argument, no shout of anger. It was an act carried out with the precision and detachment of a person completing a business task. He used a blunt, heavy object, acting swiftly and brutally, giving her no chance to beg or fight back. What Mark did next was chilling. He didn't flee. He cleaned himself up, changed his clothes, and made a phone call. Not to the police, but to his lawyer. His statement was meticulously prepared. A break-in, a struggle, a terrible accident. But his calculation failed. Police detected his suspicious lack of emotion, and more importantly, found no signs of forced entry. Mark's eyes, normally sharp and self-satisfied, revealed a terrifying void. Utter coldness. In his testimony, Mark never expressed remorse for Sarah's death. He only spoke of the inconvenience of being arrested, the collapse of his career. Sarah's death was the terrifying culmination of possessive jealousy, showing that when a narcissist's self-esteem is threatened, they can turn a birthday gift into the coldest tombstone. Story 3. Cain's Revenge. The true story of two brothers, Jacob and Ethan, raised on a secluded farm in Kansas. A simmering rivalry over land inheritance and parental affection escalated into deadly hatred. On a stormy night, the older brother, blinded by envy, committed a brutal act, echoing humanity's most ancient tragedy. The golden wheat fields of Kansas looked serene from afar, but for Jacob and Ethan, they were a battleground. This expansive farm was the family legacy, something both craved while growing up, but only one truly inherited the respect. Jacob, the elder brother, was a gruff, hard-working man. He was the one sweating on the land, the one fixing the machinery. Yet he always carried the complex that he was never the best. Ethan, his younger brother, was the opposite. Smart, charming, and consistently favored by their father in business decisions. After their father's death, the conflict erupted violently. Though they co-owned the farm, Jacob believed Ethan was manipulating the situation to seize the larger share. especially the most fertile plot of land Jacob had long desired. Jacob's envy wasn't just about the land, it was about recognition. He felt he had been robbed of everything: his parents' affection, the town's admiration, and now, his economic future. The resentment simmering inside Jacob turned into cold malice, a poison that eroded his soul. Everything came to a head on a late autumn night, as a severe storm swept across the dry fields. Ethan returned home after a tense meeting with lawyers about the property division. The rain poured down, the wind howled like a lament, creating the perfect backdrop for the impending tragedy. The argument began in the old barn, where the smell of grease and damp earth mixed with brutality. Ethan, in a moment of fury, said the one thing Jacob feared most. "You were always second best, Jacob. Even Dad knew it." Those words shattered the final barrier. Jacob no longer saw Ethan as his brother. He saw only a betrayer, a shadow that had eclipsed his entire life. Within his reach was a heavy grain shovel, a familiar farming tool, now transformed into a weapon. Jacob acted in an explosive moment of accumulated rage. It was an instinctual brutality, fueled by decades of jealousy. Ethan collapsed in the darkness and mud of the barn, his life extinguished by his own flesh and blood. After it was over, Jacob did not run. He knelt beside Ethan, but not to mourn. Instead, he attempted to conceal the crime by burying the body right on the disputed land, believing the storm and the isolation would hide everything. However, Ethan's sudden absence quickly drew attention. Jacob's cold demeanor and evasive answers raised detectives' suspicions. Eventually, the tiny blood traces on the shovel found in the barn became the undeniable proof. This story is a horrifying reminder of the modern-day Cain and Abel tragedy. It shows how envy and greed can turn brotherhood into an eternal feud, and how a sibling, instead of being a protector, can become the coldest destroyer on the very land that nurtured them both. Story 4. The Hue of Contempt. The true story of a family in a southern state where 4 siblings, particularly the eldest, Sarah, concocted a heinous plan to murder their parents. The parents were abusive, neglectful, and created a horrifying living environment. The case is particularly chilling because it was an organized act, carried out with the cold detachment of children who believed they were freeing themselves. The dilapidated 2-story house deep in a dark alley in Alabama was not a home. It was a fortress of despair. The parents, Jack and Brenda, were addicts who had replaced love with screaming, physical violence, and complete neglect. Their 4 children, Sarah, 17, the planner, along with 2 younger brothers and a sister, grew up malnourished, emotionally deprived, and constantly having to defend each other. Sarah was the eldest, the one who bore the responsibility of an adult from a very young age. She cooked, cleaned, and tried to keep her siblings away from their parents' erratic rage. But that care gave rise to an emotion more toxic than anger: absolute contempt. She no longer saw her parents as protectors. She saw them as enemies, the only obstacle separating them from a normal life. In a damp, dirty bedroom, Sarah began to hold secret meetings with her siblings. The plan was not an outburst, but a meticulous strategy. They discussed every aspect: how to carry it out, how to dispose of the evidence, and most importantly, the story they would tell the police. On that fateful night, as Jack and Brenda returned home drunk and began arguing as usual, the children executed the plan. Sarah took the lead role without hesitation or fear. The younger brothers assisted, carrying out the brutal acts they had been trained to do. What made this case chilling was the apathy in their actions. The later testimony of one of the children revealed, "It was like doing chores. We just wanted to get it over with." They took their parents' lives in silence, without screams, only with cold determination. After it was done, Sarah and her siblings hastily cleaned the scene and fabricated a story about a break-in and self-defense. When the police arrived, they found the children huddled together, wearing expressions of fear and distress. However, the perfection of their story was its fatal flaw. Their testimonies were too consistent, too coherent for victims of a sudden attack. Detectives noted the absence of genuine grief. Instead, there was a terrible sense of relief. Under intense interrogation, the truth finally emerged. Sarah, the architect of the crime, confessed with not a shred of remorse, claiming she had saved her siblings from a life of misery. This case is a dual tragedy: the tragedy of children robbed of their childhood, and the tragedy of the ultimate collapse of the concept of family. It shows how continuous abuse can create a whole new kind of monster, one in the form of children who commit the most horrific crime with the coldness of seasoned adults. Story 5. The Blood Oath at Summer Camp. The true story of two best friends, David and Alex, who shared everything until competition and a dark secret shattered their bond. During a summer camping trip where they once swore eternal friendship, envy led to a brutal and violent murder, proving that betrayal can kill. David and Alex were inseparable since they were 10. Their relationship was built on childish promises of absolute loyalty, secrets buried in time capsules, and summer nights camping under the stars. In college, they started a business together, dreaming of conquering the world. But as their careers progressed, their paths began to diverge. Alex, who always presented himself as the leader, was the one whose ideas were rejected and who faced failure. David, the quieter one, with his innovative ideas, achieved resounding success, signing a major contract that they had both dreamed of. David's success didn't bring joy to Alex. It created a deep chasm of envy, a feeling that he had been replaced and betrayed. Alex began to suspect that David had not only taken his ideas, but also taken the most valuable thing he had, Alex's ex-girlfriend. This, combined with his continuous professional failures, brewed a cold resentment. He didn't want David dead. He wanted David to feel the pain, failure, and loneliness that he himself was experiencing. To try and mend things, David suggested they go camping in the woods they frequented as children, the spot where they had performed their blood oath. Alex agreed, but not with the intention of reconciliation. He went there with a plan, believing this was his last chance to reclaim what he felt was rightfully his, or at least prevent David from enjoying it. That dark night in the woods, beside the flickering campfire, the blood oath turned into real blood. They started arguing, not about money, but about loyalty. Alex accused David of betraying every promise, of using their friendship for personal gain. David fought back, trying to explain that he always considered Alex a brother. But Alex wasn't listening. He was blinded by bitterness and the feeling of being discarded. In a horrifying moment, Alex used a hunting knife they had brought for protection, but which Alex had premeditated, to attack David. The assault was brutal and personal, the explosive result of suppressed jealousy. Alex then attempted to stage the scene as a hunting accident or an attack by a wild animal. He left David deep in the woods and drove home. However, small details in Alex's story, The absence of tears, the excessive attention to technical details about the accident, and time discrepancies made detectives suspicious. Eventually, small clues at the campsite led the police back to Alex. When cornered, Alex confessed to his crime, but he didn't see it as killing a friend. He saw it as punishment for betrayal. This story was a shock to the town. The closest, most trusted relationship could end in such extreme violence, proving that envy can kill a friendship faster than any enemy. Story 6. The elder sister's agony. The true story of two sisters, Maria and Lisa, who grew up in a poor immigrant family in New York City. Maria, the eldest, carried all the family responsibilities, while Lisa, the younger sister, was irresponsible and selfish. The prolonged tension and exhaustion pushed Maria to her breaking point, leading to a violent, eruptive act in search of freedom. The busy, noisy borough of Queens, New York, was where they grew up. In their cramped apartment, 24-year-old Maria was the unofficial breadwinner. Her parents struggled with two low-paying jobs, and Maria had given up her college dreams to work night shifts, send money home, and look after her 19-year-old sister, Lisa. Maria was sacrifice. Lisa was indulgence. Lisa was rebellious, demanding, and utterly ungrateful. She spent the family's meager savings on clothes and parties, and when Maria complained, Lisa responded with cutting sarcasm. Lisa saw Maria as a failure, someone too honest and boring to enjoy life. To Lisa, her sister's sacrifice was a given, an obligation that didn't require reciprocation. The tension between them was not a normal family quarrel. It was a perpetual war between responsibility and carelessness. Maria constantly felt used, drained of energy and emotion. Her despair was not about poverty, but about the absence of gratitude and respect from the very sister she had tried to protect. On the fateful night, Maria, who had worked a continuous 14-hour shift, returned home exhausted, only to discover Lisa had stolen her credit card to go on a shopping spree. When Maria confronted her, Lisa sneered and said a venomous line. "Do you think you're a saint? You only sacrifice because you don't have the courage to live for yourself." Those words were the final straw. Maria no longer saw her sister. She saw a burden, a shadow that had destroyed every chance for her happiness. The rage that erupted was not anger, but an explosion of exhaustion and hopelessness. In the cramped kitchen, where the smell of food and disappointment always lingered, Maria took her sister's life. It was a raw, violent act, unplanned, driven by the desperate need to end the torment. She didn't want to hurt Lisa. She wanted to hurt the burden Lisa represented. After it happened, Maria didn't flee or attempt to stage the scene. She called the police, and when they arrived, they found Maria sitting on the floor, head in her hands, completely broken. She wasn't crying out of fear, but out of a horrifying relief. Maria's testimony at the police station was a heartbreaking indictment of family pressure and mental exhaustion. She spoke of years of unrewarded sacrifice, the feeling of being defrauded, and the moment she could no longer see the line between her sister and despair. This case is a stark reminder that sometimes the most horrific crimes come from those pushed to the very limits of their capacity for self-sacrifice. It is the tragedy of an elder sister who chose violence as a desperate escape from the vicious cycle of ingratitude and responsibility. Story 7. The Heir's Curse. The true story of Michael, a nephew obsessed with the wealth of his aunt and uncle. Raised on the delusion of a denied inheritance, Michael meticulously planned to eliminate the blood relatives who had taken him in, all to seize their fortune. The case is a chilling testament to how greed can corrode kinship. In a quiet, affluent area of Virginia, The home of the wealthy middle-aged couple, Aunt Carol and Uncle Robert, was the place where Michael was welcomed after his parents died young. Robert and Carol were childless, and they loved Michael like their own son, providing him with a comfortable life and a good education. But Michael felt no gratitude. He grew up with an odd sense of entitlement to their assets. He believed he was not just a sheltered nephew, but the rightful heir to a fortune that should have been his all along. As Michael entered adulthood, Robert and Carol began to tighten their spending, encouraging him to become independent. Michael viewed this as a cruel betrayal. Respect turned into resentment, and resentment turned into a cold plan. Michael, who closely tracked his aunt and uncle's finances, knew he would either have to wait decades or take action. He chose the latter. Michael spent months researching. He was not an impulsive killer. He was an engineer of crime. He wanted everything to look like a botched robbery, a random act of external violence. On the fateful night, Michael exploited his familiarity with the house. He unlatched a back window and waited for the perfect moment. He did not act in a fit of rage. He acted with the focus of someone completing a crucial financial transaction. He woke Robert and Carol in their bedroom. The couple's horror upon realizing the attacker was Michael, the nephew they cherished, was the most terrifying detail of the case. He took their lives swiftly and brutally, ensuring no witnesses could testify against him. After the murder, Michael stole a few inexpensive items to stage the scene and attempted to erase his tracks. He called the police in the morning, feigning discovery of the crime, his tears and fear appearing perfectly genuine. However, detectives found a flaw. Michael's overly detailed knowledge of where the stolen items were located and his emotional detachment when discussing the crime scene raised their suspicion. The motive was clear: money. The case concluded with Michael's cold confession, a man who traded kinship for a fortune he could not enjoy. It is a terrifying reminder that sometimes greed and ingratitude can turn an heir into a killer, and blood is not always thicker than water, but often just spilled liquid on the floor. Story 8. The Poison Ring. The true story of Linda, a sister-in-law who always felt like an outsider and was despised by her husband's brother, Kevin. Kevin believed Linda was unworthy of his family's wealth and affection. The simmering feud, driven by a sense of being robbed and differences in social standing, led to a murder planned with insidious and subtle calculation. They lived in the suburbs of Boston, an old, wealthy family with deep roots. Linda married the eldest son, the main heir to the family company, but she was never truly welcomed. Her brother-in-law, Kevin, a sharp-tongued man, always believed Linda was a gold digger, unworthy of their lineage. Kevin never openly fought, but he used cold contempt and cutting remarks to wound Linda. He constantly questioned her loyalty, cast doubt on her past, and sowed discord between Linda and her husband. Linda felt trapped. She had the wealth and status, but she paid the price with isolation and endless hostility from Kevin. The feeling of rejection and control began to corrode Linda. She could not tolerate the thought that Kevin would always stand between her and the life she had fought to claim. To Linda, Kevin was the sole obstacle preventing her from truly becoming part of the family and controlling her financial future. Linda, being an intelligent woman, sought an extreme and subtle solution. She did not want an impulsive act. She wanted an untraceable murder, a natural disappearance to ensure she would not be suspected. Her plan was sheer calculation. She meticulously researched poisons, looking for a substance that could mimic a heart attack or a fatal illness. She spent months preparing. The opportunity arose during a small family gathering. Linda, with a perfectly friendly smile, offered Kevin a special cocktail. She acted with chilling composure, engaging in cheerful conversation while the poison began to take effect. She watched Kevin collapse, not with fear, but with a cold sense of satisfaction. Initially, Kevin's death was ruled a medical incident. No one suspected the mild-mannered sister-in-law, who called the ambulance and wept over the terrible loss. But the story didn't end there. Linda's eagerness for control and her hasty moves to claim assets raised suspicion among other family members. Finally, a deeper investigation, prompted by her own husband's doubt, uncovered the rare toxins and evidence of secretive online purchases. This case is a grim tale of the slow burn hatred in an extended family, where financial control and social standing can turn a friendly smile into a deadly poison ring. It shows the thin line between courtesy and malice when greed speaks loudest. Story 9. The Bloody Testament. The true story of Aunt Evelyn, who believed she was entitled to the entire inheritance of her sister. Upon discovering that the majority of the estate was left to her only niece, Sarah, greed transformed Aunt Evelyn into a cold-blooded killer, utilizing familial trust to commit the crime. In Seattle, Washington, where wealth had been accumulated over generations, the relationship between Aunt Evelyn and her niece Sarah was widely admired. After Sarah's mother passed away, Aunt Evelyn stepped in, taking on the role of caregiver and mentor to the young college graduate, Sarah. But behind the facade of care was a chilling calculation. Evelyn had lived her whole life in the shadow of her sister, the one who had married a wealthy, successful man. Evelyn believed that because she had spent her sister's final years as a caregiver, she deserved to be the sole heir. She rationalized that she needed the money more than Sarah, who was young and could build her own life. When the lawyer opened the will, the harsh truth hit Evelyn. The majority of the estate was left to Sarah, with the stated purpose of securing the young woman's future. Evelyn received only a small sum, considered a thank you for the assistance. The feeling of betrayal blinded Evelyn. She didn't see kindness. She saw the ultimate contempt. She convinced herself that Sarah had somehow manipulated her mother at the last moment. Greed and envy turned kinship into a target that needed to be eliminated to rectify this injustice. Evelyn meticulously planned. She knew Sarah's habits well, knowing her niece trusted her absolutely. She decided to act within the very house that she believed should have been hers. The crime was executed subtly and deceptively. She used a sophisticated method, ensuring that Sarah's death would look like a household accident or an unfortunate medical incident. She did it on a quiet afternoon when they were alone at home. Evelyn acted quickly, using her experience as a caregiver to avoid leaving too many obvious traces. After the murder, Evelyn called the police, putting on a perfect performance of a shocked aunt discovering the tragedy. She was the comforter, the funeral organizer, and the sole person who benefited from Sarah's death. But the police soon realized something was wrong. Evelyn was too controlling of the narrative, too focused on steering them toward the possibility of an accident. Deeper interrogation and small, missed clues at the scene forced Evelyn to face the truth. This case is a horrifying story about the destruction of a family due to wills and money. It proves that, for some, avarice trumps all, turning a relative into the final obstacle on the path to wealth. The familial love Sarah trusted turned into a death trap set by her own blood. Story 10. The Ultimate Caretaker. The true story of Dennis, the nephew-in-law, who married the niece of a wealthy, ailing, elderly woman. Dennis, feeling trapped in his role as a caretaker and constantly despised by the matriarch, decided to brutally end his duty to seize the inheritance. The case is a cold example of how exhaustion and greed can turn a relative into a killer. They belonged to the old upper class of Florida, where elderly women guarded their wealth and status with severity. Madam Eleanor was the matriarch, a wealthy and difficult widow. Her great-niece, Alice, married Dennis, a man from a lower class who always felt like an outsider in the family. Dennis's role in the family was ambiguous. He was tasked with caring for Madam Eleanor as her health declined. In Madam Eleanor's eyes, Dennis was not a nephew-in-law. He was a paid servant whom she regularly criticized, despised, and undervalued his efforts. For years, Dennis endured insults, financial control, and continuous humiliation. He felt trapped, imprisoned by his love for his wife and the burden of an unappreciated caretaker. He knew that the longer Madam Eleanor lived, the more distant his and his wife's inheritance prospects became. Physical and psychological exhaustion, combined with envy for the untouchable wealth, turned Dennis's resentment into a plan. He decided that the only way to free himself and his wife from Madam Eleanor's shackles was to take her life. Dennis studied Madam Eleanor's medication habits in detail. He didn't want violence. He wanted a peaceful death, resembling a natural end due to age and illness. He used the trust Madam Eleanor placed in him as a caretaker to commit the crime. One night, Dennis used Madam Eleanor's own sedatives to end her life. He acted coldly, cleaned everything up afterward, and called in the morning, reporting that she had passed away in her sleep. Initially, investigators believed the story. The death of an ailing, elderly person seemed unsuspicious. However, Dennis's unusual haste in demanding access to bank accounts and the will made detectives wary. They began to review his personal life and discovered hidden stress, significant debt, and a deep-seated resentment toward Madam Eleanor. The truth was eventually revealed through a meticulous autopsy and Dennis's contradictory statements. He had murdered not in a fit of rage, but out of exhaustion and a cold calculation for money. This case is a wake-up call about the dangers of unsupported caregiving roles and how in-law relatives can become the most ruthless killers. It shows how greed, when combined with dehumanization and exhaustion, can break all barriers of kinship and turn a caregiving duty into a death sentence.